Hello and welcome, everyone. We are so excited to have Tim Dean. Some of you may remember he did a presentation for us quite a while ago talking about LinkedIn, and today he is talking about managing millennials. Tim has a ton of expertise to share with you. He does a lot of work in this space, so I'm really excited about what he's offering. To let all of you know, Tim is a graduate of the Center for Coaching Certification. He is a certified professional coach, and Tim is a published author. So we're so excited to welcome him here. Tim, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Excellent. Thanks, Kathy. Show my screen. Got it. And let's start. So thank you. Welcome, everyone. I am thrilled to be here. This is one of my favorite topics, millennials. And I just ask you to get out a paper and pencil because there might be some times to capture a couple ahas, maybe write down a few things. We're going to have a couple kind of virtual breakouts that you'll be able to participate on. So without further ado, I always like to start when we hear the word millennials. It's right out of the gate. They clearly are killing everything. So while that clearly is a stereotype, which we'll address soon, we can't ignore the volume of articles and white papers and research that claims that truly the millennials are ruining everything. I'm here to say that's not true. You'll understand that more later, but it's just a way to start that subjectively and even subconsciously, the first thing that comes to our mind when we hear millennials is all of this. So we need to get this out there, get it out of the way, and focus on first, what is diversity? So as you're sitting there in your office or home, what words come to mind when you think of the word diversity? Just take 5 seconds, maybe write something down. Maybe you're thinking of any or several of these. All of these are elements that combine the condition of diversity. And generational differences, specifically around millennials today, is just another piece of this puzzle. So I'm not here necessarily to address several of these other pieces of diversity. What I am here to share is how to better understand the millennial perspective on how it fits into this definition. Read this really nice quote.
Wow.
From some of the questions that Kathy shared with me prior to starting today, I know a number of you are open and looking for just some information on coaching and managing and the mindset, and some of you are millennials as well, just on how you're perceived in the marketplace. Oh, wait. But this was written almost 100 years ago. So let's all just understand that this mindset of kind of criticizing, if you will, the current generation has been going on for many, many generations. So what defines a generation? So again, I'm going to ask you just to take 10 seconds and just think about what you feel defines a generation. Maybe you write something down or just have it in your brain, have it in your mind.
Yeah, and if they want to share it in the question panel, we can read a few of the responses too. So if you guys will type some things in.
That's a great idea, and thanks, Kat.
Mm-hmm.
So what comes to mind? You may be typing in or thinking of several of these things or more. This is not all inclusive. Some people say a generation is experiences or core values or all of the above. I'm here to just request that for today's webinar, we're going to use what is typically defined for a generation, which is a birth cohort that shares social, political, and economic events during primarily their formative years, which is age 8 to 20.
So what's interesting is people that are responding are saying, somebody said 25 years, a group of people born in the same general time period, so they experience the same cultural things. a way of thinking
Excellent.
and approaching life, a new era with new moral ideas and social ideas. So a lot of things right in keeping with that.
Exactly. Now, what's interesting, this was the typical definition for the past several. We need to add one more, though, informational point, and now we need to include a fourth uh, event, if you will. So it's social, political, economic, and now technological events. And we'll talk a little bit, or I'll share a little bit later about the importance of that. Again, given just how technology has expedited and, in fact, has shortened the time frame of what we're defining as a generation. And I'll show you a graph later on that. So this is what we're using today. Birth cohort shares these things during the formative years. I just want to briefly go through the 5 working generations. Certainly keep interest of where maybe someone you're in, or maybe your parents or kids are in. I also just want to draw your attention to the number that's at the far right. So for example, traditionalists are 31 million. Keep your eye on how that number is increasing and where it is today for millennials. So when you think about the traditional or silent generation in general, these are those social, political, economic events that shape them. So I'm sure, again, if your parents or grandparents or even yourself maybe, that these are the things that left that lasting imprint. This is more than just having a memory of something. This is where it literally left its mark. Now, boomers, clearly big generation. In fact, the 75 million, the largest generation in my lifetime and most of our lifetimes until 2016. And I'll show you that in a second. In general, baby boomers, shaped by these things. And the difference I meant about a memory versus an imprint is, and I just want to share a story, when my mom always talked about the day Kennedy was shot, where she knew exactly which baby she was feeding, she knew what room she was sitting in, she knew what she was wearing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the type of things that has left this picture-perfect snapshot. And it was what was going on in the world around that that starts to develop a definition of a generation and values and experience, et cetera. Generation X, notice the number precipitously drops, 66 million. It's the smallest generation living right now. That's actually my generation. In general, these are the events. Now technology is coming in. Gen X is the one generation that lived or is living through both pre-technology and now current technology. And there's some advantages of that at the bridge, but notice the number again, 66 million. The implications of that are huge, especially when it comes to corporate America or jobs or just succession planning, because with boomers, baby boomers retiring at upwards of 10,000 a day, we, the Gen Xers, we don't have the math. We don't have the numbers to fill all of those open positions. So guess who has to lead sooner and younger than any generation before them? And it's the Gen Y, Millennials, the ones that we're going to talk about today. The ones that are roughly between the ages of 22 or 3 to 35 and 6. Again, notice the number. They're now the largest generation in population in the US and in the workplace. And notice there's now a plus there, and that's from migration. So the generation continues to, in fact, grow in numbers. In general, these are the social, political, economic, and technological events. And finally, while certainly not focused yet, Gen Z, these are the folks that are literally the oldest generation Zs right now are seniors in college. So they'll be joining the workplace in 4 or 5 months, which will now add a 5th generation to the workplace. And notice they also have they're already greater than Gen X, and they're also growing. And these are the events that have been shaping them. And I just want to circle back to the imprint versus memory thing again. The Asia tsunami, I mean, as a Gen Xer, I certainly remember it. I couldn't tell you, though, what year it was. I just remember it was sometime around Christmas, maybe, or New Year's, December. But again, I have a memory of its event and its cataclysmic, consequences. It just didn't happen during my formative years. So quickly, let me just briefly go through. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this. If anyone is just interested in kind of the history of generations, two authors, Howe and Strauss, have written several books, you may have heard of them, where they've hypothesized in America that we, in fact, are repeating 80-year cycles of 4 20-year generations, where based on just a typical cycle, think of like a sine curve or a biorhythm curve of there's on the way up, there's growth, and then there's collapse, and then maybe there's war, and then there's recovery and growth, and et cetera, that the relationship between historical events and generational personas just keep repeating itself. There's some validity to this, and I just share it as some context if you're interested in delving into what they define as a generation. And in fact, the graph I'm showing here is 1901. In their book, they in fact took it all the way back to the 15 or 1600s, where in fact we just keep repeating this. The challenge nowadays is technology, honestly. Because of technology, the length of time of these, quote, windows of generations are shrinking. So just now the one and only door prize or giveaway for today, and the person who types this in the fastest to Kathy will win. So I just populated digits next to GI, silent, and boomer. The first person who can type in what that represents correctly will win a copy of Coaching Perspectives 5, which is the annual book that Kathy publishes, compliments of graduates who submit individual chapters.
All right, so I am waiting for somebody to type it in. They haven't figured it out yet, Tim. So next to, next to the top one, it says 7, then you've got 0 next to the silent generation and 4 next to the boomer generation. What are those numbers talking about?
What could that possibly represent? 7 GI, 0 silent, and 4 boomers. And this is US specific.
Too funny. They're not figuring it out, Tim. Okay, I got somebody guessed. Tim told me the answer ahead of time because I don't think I would have figured this one out either. So I'll share the guesses that are not accurate. Somebody put wars. Somebody put career changes.
Oh, good answer.
Somebody else put the order.
Well, the correct answer is anything, Kath, before I give it out?
Is anyone else going to type something in and have a chance to win this book from Tim? Okay, Tim, you can give him the answer.
It is U.S. presidents. So GI presidents that were born during the GI generation include Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, and Dad Bush. The U.S. has had 0 presidents out of the silent generation, and currently we've had 4 boomer presidents: Clinton, Bush, son, Obama, and Trump. So just something fascinating, and the analogous to millennials, if there's any truth behind this cycle, guess who truly may be one of our greatest generations coming. So just some fascinating data points. Just one other point around generations, specifically millennials. The U.S. is now at the highest multi-generational household percent in over 70 years. And what that means is by the end of 2015, as you can see at the end of that graph, 39.5% of 18 to 34-year-olds had moved back home. Now at the end of 2016, which is the latest data available, it's actually gone up 0.5% to 40%. And I included the percents of what boomers and Gen Xers were when they finished college, basically. It's when you finish school, where do you go next? And I always love to share as a Gen Xer, you couldn't pay me to move back home when I finished college. But it's just so different now. Not better, not worse, and we're going to talk about that. It's just a different environment, and there's some positive reasons why millennials are moving back home, as well as it's by choice or not, whether financial or insurance for health, etc. It's just a reality, though. And then what are those implications of what they bring to the workplace and how they think and how they are motivated, etc. This is an important thing just to keep in mind. So I'm just going to stop here for just a second and now ask everyone listening, grab that pencil and paper, and for like just 30 seconds, I've shown here 5 very stereotypical pictures of millennials. And I love the one in the middle. That was from a comic strip of all the trophies. If you could read some of them, you know, not too bad, 22nd place, sort of cared. I want you just to write down as many negative stereotypes as you can think of for the millennial generation. Just take 30 seconds.
And if a few of you want to share those in the question panel, we can shout those out.
Good point. No holding back.
So we've got entitled is the first one that comes in. Somebody else said selfish, immature, narcissistic, lazy. Somebody else said lazy. A couple people said me, needy.
When I did this for a group live in Savannah, Georgia, they filled we've all seen the flip chart pads that are, you know, stick them on the top and they're big and you can fill several columns of stuff. They filled 3 full pages of that.
Yeah, I'm getting more and more in them. I mean, they are just like scrolling by so fast. I'm having a hard time keeping up here. Let's see. They're saying things like, let me get, sorry. They went by really fast.
I'm not surprised, Kathy.
Here's one that's funny. One person said low motivation. A different person said highly motivated.
Huh.
Somebody said poor work ethic, disrespectful, want to be in control, unfocused, selfish, privileged. So we're getting quite a range. And what's interesting is I'm wondering what the millennials think about millennials in comparison to people from the other generations.
Well, first off, a couple observations. One, it's always easy to quickly rattle off all of the negative stereotypes first, which is why we're doing this first, because we're inundated with it anyway. So I'm not surprised. The other thing is, and it's a great segue, Kath, is all of you that are non-millennials that typed in all of those very good stereotypes, but they're stereotypes. Look at the box that you are. If you're a boomer, traditional, or Gen Xer, this is how they think of you.
That's awesome.
So I share this initially because we actually, again, need to get this out of the way because it's subconsciously and it's the first thing we think of. Very subjective. But just be aware everything is two-way, like coaching, unlike coaching, which is one way. Just remember, this is what others think of you. Doesn't mean it's true. It's just those are the mindsets that they're initially thinking of. So how do we move past that? Well, the first tip of many today is focus on connecting with the person, the individual, less on the stereotype. Someone mentioned narcissistic. That's very common as a negative stereotype for millennials. Newsflash, though, for everyone listening, just read the following. So in other words, get over it. It's a fact. Younger generations haven't had the years of experience and become wiser to recognize this. Therefore, it is what it is, and move on. I like to share these 5 time covers from dating all the way back to the 60s, how even in literature and marketing, if you will, messaging, we've been trained, if you will, to certainly think of the younger generation as the death of us all. That always the younger generation is somehow screwing up, somehow will have it worse, et cetera, et cetera. It has been communicated this way for decades. New markers for success. There's a survey I like to reference here in the session or in the webinar, and again, get ready to type in an answer. Millennials were asked, what age do you become an adult? Type in what you think the #1 answer millennials gave to becoming an adult.
I've got 27, 16, 18, 30, 27, 25, 18, a lot of 25, 21, 16, 18, 30.
Well, the last one was, the answer is 30. And if you could see,
Really?
when I deliver this live to a room full of especially Gen Xers and Boomers, the heads virtually explode when they hear that.
They think they're not an adult till they're 30. Wow, that's a new one for me.
In fact, there's a BBC News article that I printed just a few weeks ago that adolescence now lasts from age 10 to 24, not 10 to 19.
Oh.
So these new markers of success have literally changed how the current millennial generation thinks. Now, all of our boomers on the listening and even Xers, I'm sure we're thinking, wait a minute, by the time I was 30, I had this done and this done and this done. The percent of millennials that are married by age 30 is the lowest of any generation. In fact, where traditionalists were married at a rate of 65% by age 30, millennials married by age 30 is 28%. Big difference. So they're using their 20s to explore, test, evaluate, dabble, whatever verb you want to use. There's also benefits of that, which we're going to get to very shortly, and then how to capitalize on that thinking and exploration and entrepreneurship. So we're going to get to that very shortly.
Yeah, and
as I mentioned, 28.
Somebody asked, how do they define adult?
It's primarily the traditional data points or variables like getting married, having your own place, having your own car, having self-sufficient from a job, etc.
Okay, thank you.
It's basically the traditional markers that some of the older generations have always used to define adulthood. And as I shared, just look at the difference. What comes with that, though, is different too. I'm the youngest of 5. All of us went to college. That was the expectation. All of us got the degree to get a job. That was the expectation. So there was lots of, quote, stability and, quite honestly, lots of conformity. There wasn't much flexibility. The path to success was completely laid out or prepared that to follow. We had to follow it, but it was a given, very steady, very upward. Not anymore. Now think of those millennials that are constantly having to reinvent themselves. What that means is they have this freedom and authenticity and focus and passion and purpose. Unfortunately, that uncertainty brings anxiety, and there's a lot more unknown. And consequently, since they're broadcasting a lot of their life on social media, all of that has been through a filter anyway. So they're a little guarded, to be blunt, because they are pursuing authenticity with the auspice of being careful about everything they say or do, especially as they post it online. So now let's flip the switch. Now focus on what are the unique strengths that millennials can bring to your team, your workplace, any situation. Now type some of those in. What do millennials bring that's unique and a strength from them?
Okay, so we are getting breaking the mold, freshness, new thinking, great thinkers, analytical skills, creativity, technology, clean perspective, passionate, innovative. They can work all times of the day, thinking outside the box, risk takers. Um, so, sorry, they're scrolling by so fast, Tim.
Well, that's good.
Energy, freshness. Yeah, this is awesome. Entrepreneurs is in here. I'm looking for new words. So they want to save the world. They're purpose driven. They're rule breaking. They're not buried in what was. Consciousness. Insecure. Want to be in control. No. So we're getting. Those are some of the others. Okay.
So what I really want to acknowledge is I love the fact that this audience has recognized the strengths in what seems to be very equal level and equal volume.
Yes.
On average, most live audiences, this breakout is harder and the list is much shorter. But I'm pleased to hear that not with this audience, so kudos to those on today. These are just some of the unique strengths that I captured across all the generations. And the reason I include the other three here, besides millennials, is they also need to recognize that all of this is two-way, meaning they also have to recognize what their mindset is of those negative stereotypes from before and push it out, put it aside, and then now recognize what are the unique strengths that those outside the millennial generation can also bring to a team or a workplace. So bottom line is, in lieu of thinking of millennials this way, let's think of them this way. In fact, this is what is more accurate, actually. In fact, I heard some good strengths of the technology and digital and their knowledge. I'm not going to delve into deep on this graph. Basically, they're very much focused on digital referrals. They love word of mouth. In fact, millennials, as a coach, they're always open to coaching. In fact, they've been coached since birth, actually, and they're the most receptive generation to coaching to date. The other thing that I love to reference is this. 7 out of 10 feel better, more excited about a decision when they know their friends agree with them. So they seek input and in fact make decisions based on friends agreeing with input and decision. And what are the implications of that? So let's go to work. As I mentioned, millennials, the largest now in the workplace at the end of 2015. Gen Z, as I mentioned, will be coming in 4 or 5 months. And in 2 years, millennials greater than 50 of the entire, in fact, they're 53. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is just the reality of the evolution of the employee that millennials are now living. Everything on the left, to be honest, is what I remember from my first job at Westinghouse Electric. I'm originally from Pittsburgh, where knowledge was power. The ladder was very clear. You focused on inputs. I remember sending inputs to my boss that I never saw again. It would just go into a black hole and I would never hear was it correct? Was it received well? Did you even use it? Did you edit it? Never heard any of that. Everything was, again, knowledge was power. So you were less likely to share. In other words, people would hoard information. Everything on the right is now the current. It says future, but it's really now. And millennials, now the largest in the workplace, this is how they prefer to work. Let's focus on outputs. Let's share information. They're the best collaborators of any generation. You put them on a team, you'll be so glad you did. Democratize learning and teaching, meaning that it's not corporate. It's student inputted, etc. So now comes the crux of today. What is your biggest challenge with millennials right now for you? So instead of, you can type it in, But I also want you to write it down because we're going to address each one of these. And when it comes to the one that is your biggest challenge, then you'll have an opportunity to really see, and we'll delve into what are some strategies and knowledge you can use immediately to address what is your biggest challenge. So are you really stuck trying to find them, attract them? Once you have them, is your biggest challenge how to develop them? Or maybe your biggest challenge is, well, God, how do I, in fact, I heard some of the pre-questions, how do I manage them? And finally, maybe your biggest challenge is, well, they keep leaving. How do I retain them?
Yeah, and I've actually got a couple of people that asked questions on that topic ahead of time and in the question panel right now.
Excellent. Yeah, we're going to delve into all four of these, right, in order: attract, develop, manage, retain. So clearly, they all might be a challenge. I really want you to focus on, though, if you could only address one first, what is your biggest? So let's start with the first. And this is all millennial mindset. Nearly 9 out of 10 want work-life integration. Notice the word isn't balance. Gen Xers were more synonymous of wanting what is called work-life balance, which in general was, hey, when I'm at work, I'm yours, I'll work. But then when I'm done with work, I'm leaving it here, I'm going to go home, and I want to have a balanced life where I decide work is done, great, I did my work, now on my weekends or evenings, it's mine. That's no longer the case because millennials and technology and are okay with checking emails at midnight, maybe working a little on the weekends, etc. Their whole life is about integrating. It's all meshed together. So how do you do that is, and how do you attract millennials to your organization or your team, is they're much more interested on people than on the profits. Profits matter, and of course salary matters, and we'll get to that in a minute, but focus on the people. How are you treating your employees? Because they'll see it. Clearly, if possible, you want to leverage technology. They're looking to decide whether to join based on what level of technology you will allow them to use. Now, if you may not have what you feel the most updated or even just a high level of comparable technology, that might be a perfect opportunity to have a new millennial help you define and how to purchase, if you will, or just implement what's an improved level of technology. That would be a perfect project to give to a new millennial. This one also kind of rubs boomers sometimes the wrong way. Share personal values. Again, back in not so long ago, work was work. You left all your personal stuff at home. Don't distract by talking about any personal challenges. Not millennials. They love to be treated like family because work life is integrated. It's important to attract that you recognize that and share personal insights and personal values with them, and they will do the same. One thing millennials are very adamant about is they love to join a company that they feel makes a positive impact on the world around them. So where years ago, without the internet, none of us knew all the good and the bad, the ugly of any corporate stuff. I mean, they could have been doing things that were against our values. We just never knew about it. Because of technology, millennials now know all of the good, the bad, the ugly. Lawsuits, anything pending, any causes you might be involved with. Tout that. Proactively market the positive impact you're having outside of your office doors and your company's walls. They'll find it, and then they will attract themselves to you. In fact, almost 2/3 have it as a priority that the jobs they take, remember they're dabbling in their 20s, is what are you doing to make the world a better place? And if they don't see that, they're gone. Second group. Well, let me stop right there. What questions do you have about attract before we move over to develop?
Okay, so if whoever wants to type in questions specific to this topic area about attracting people, I one of the questions submitted ahead of time that may be related to this is what motivates them, and it seems like you're answering that with they care that the company is developing their people and making the world a better place. Um, and I'm
Yeah, there'll be, when we hit some of the other areas, there's more information on how to motivate them because that into how to retain them.
hmm yeah. And then the comments I'm getting is they're really liking what you're doing with this information. So yeah.
Okay. And there'll be time for questions throughout and at the end. So
Yeah,
I
and
just want
somebody said, let's see, what motivates them to want to get a job to begin with?
oh, good question.
That was an interesting question.
Yeah, well, that's an actually sort of a teed up softball question. Hiring a professional coach.
Ah, there you go.
I have many millennial clients that their parents have in fact reached out to me on their millennial son or daughter's behalf, where the parent is in their own somewhat stereotypical or baby boomer mindset thinking, well, because my millennial son or daughter isn't taking all of the conformed and path known steps that I did, therefore that must mean he or she is unmotivated or he or she is not showing initiative. That's where, as a coach, as Kathy, anyone who's a graduate of CCC knows, you partner with that individual, that millennial, to help them define what exactly do they want.
Nice.
Great question.
And actually, they did a follow up. It said, I am their coach, and they still don't really want a job.
Let's see. What would be that typical challenging question, Kathy? Of well, oh, okay. How do you plan on making a living?
Yeah, which is the pushback. What happens if you don't get a job? What happens if you stay
Yeah.
where you're at? Yeah.
What's your monthly output of money? How do you earn that?
Yeah. Yep.
Let's move on to develop. Sometimes while you have them, this is a challenge for millennials because they've turned the workplace on its side. They are not going to sit in a cube for 8 hours a day. On the contrary, they will work at home. They can work at home. They sometimes will even, again, work at midnight, weekends. So how can you capitalize on that mindset, that integration of work and life? The first is this stat. Almost 3/4 will actually love and prefer an entrepreneurial culture. Now, I hear a lot of feedback from C-suites or executives or even managers that say, well, all this millennial wants to do is just dabble here and then leave and start their own company. Well, flip it around. What can you do entrepreneurially to motivate them, and we'll talk about this, to retain them? Because they want a culture that's entrepreneurial, I would then challenge you on how can you learn from them through constant communication of what entrepreneurial thinking you could put them to work on in your company. Again, think outside the proverbial standard box and then ask them, what or how questions. How would that look? What would you like to be measured on? Okay, how often do you want to stay in contact? Et cetera, et cetera. There's just an excellent opportunity to pull out of them what level of entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial mindset to just let them run with it. This is always fascinating to me. Another thing on communication, 8 in 10 would rather work for a company that has open communication. Now, the press and all we hear about from the Googles and Amazons and et cetera are all the perks. This is much more important. So when you have them, what are you doing to develop them through constant communication? One example or tactic is this. All of us older generations in general, whenever we wanted to learn something, we always had to go older. An older sibling, a teacher, maybe a parent, an apprentice, or I remember calling the Carnegie Library all the time to learn something. For the first time ever, we as adults, if you will, Gen Xers and boomers, and even traditionalists, have to go to millennials to learn something new because of technology. So what better opportunity to reverse mentor? That is one of the best things to implement immediately and continuously as a way to develop millennials. Reverse mentor is exactly what it implies. It's two-way. Match up a millennial with a person outside of their generation because they will both teach each other something. Another way to develop millennials, again, is they want to know where their assignment fits, meaning meaningful. Remember the example I gave where I just remember sending work product or maybe Excel file research to my boss and then never saw or heard of it again and just waited for my next assignment. That's not going to fly. They want to know the work they're doing, how does it fit with the organization's mission? Nearly 100%, 95%. You will find them much more motivated when you share with them what they do, how it fits. Let me stop there on develop before we move to manage. What questions around develop may come to mind?
And I'm unsure if this question is for the word develop. Here's what was put in. Uh, They said, we'll add value at the end if there's a clarification how to recognize millennials who may not fit into the predominant mold that appears to define millennials, and then the process to manage them as the exception.
And that's excellent perspective. And that's yes, the generations are there to help us kind of give guidance, but that's an excellent observation that especially if the person is birth cohort, if you will, is on a cusp or is closer to one end of the end of one or the beginning of another, that's very relevant and very common, where individuals will demonstrate differing or both kind of mindsets. And through communication and questions, it's learning where is that individual coming from for them. Great point. So manage. As you can see, almost 80% would rather have a coach or mentor. In fact, strike manage entirely. And now you're coaching them. And through coaching, it's ideal to more focus on outcomes, not the hours. Now, I understand, like at a bank or at a manufacturing facility, flexibility of hours is not possible. However, for where it is, it's what are the outcomes that the millennial is working on, and how do you coach them on achieving those outcomes? One way to increase the success of all of this is, in general, millennials are much stronger working on projects in series, meaning one focus on product A or project A, all of the things that entails. Again, what are the outcomes? How are we moving forward? And just as it's about to be completed as predefined, have another project ready to ramp up and share that with that millennial, knowing that there's another project. That in general is more effective than giving a millennial 5, 7, 9 different kind of mini things to juggle and all the balls in the air, if you will, and having, I'm visualizing someone's desk with 7 different file stacks. So it's ideally series versus parallel. And when you're doing it in series, focus on outcomes, which they can help define because they love feedback. Remember, they're the best team player, they're the best collaborator. They want to be treated like family. They crave feedback. They make decisions based on their friends' feedback. One interesting yet very real challenge is trust. As you can see from this graph, the question was asked, generally speaking, would you say that most people can be trusted or that you can't be too careful in dealing with people? This is a very precipitous difference of the other generations of millennials, meaning they are the less trusting of others. Now, there could be an entire webinar focused on the reasons for this. The one analogies I love to use, because it's something most can relate to, is sports. Everyone knows Lance Armstrong, where for years, as he kept winning Tour de France's, he kept saying, no, I didn't take any drugs. No, I wasn't taking anything. No, I wasn't taking anything. Adamantly denied, denied, denied. Then, no surprise, okay, sorry, I was, okay. So another sports example I like to give, because I'm a big baseball fan, is Ryan Braun, who's a baseball player for the Milwaukee Brewers. That's an American Major League Baseball team. He had a press conference on the field of his ballpark, again, denying emphatically, no, I've never taken performance-enhancing drugs. In fact, again, he threw a press conference to be so blunt about it. Well, a few months later, he got tested, got busted, and got suspended for a whole year. So there's many examples in all aspects of industry and social and political areas where millennials have been exposed to just that exact example, where they hear one thing over and over only to then have it be smacked back, well, nope, it was all a lie. Therefore, they're coming in just less trusting. Remember the cautiousness I mentioned? Remember the guardingness? They're a little guarded, certainly on social media. Everything has to go through a filter. Remember, they're a little more anxious because they're dabbling in different things with the freedom and flexibility. It also comes with some anxiety. It also comes with less trust. So one way to foster trust as their coach is to just be more transparent. When you're more transparent up front with how their job fits, how their work fits, treating them like family a little more, maybe sharing more personal values, now you're on the road to foster more trust with them, and it will be reciprocal.
So, Tim, a couple of questions have come in. One person said, do they like one-on-one communication or group communication?
Great question. I would say both. And in fact, I've done this at a group setting, at a corporate setting, is what is your preferred? Maybe, and I thought one of the best answers was very situational. They said, well, if it's information or feedback that all of us would benefit from, then group. But if it's a little more personal or I'm more cautious, then let's save that for our one-to-one.
Okay, awesome. And then the chart that you showed had a spike up of the level of trust for millennials. So the question came in, what was the main event in that rise of trust that occurred?
Yeah, right. Although I guess it was very, very observant. It was a slight increase, and even Gen Xers had a much higher jump, if you will. That was post-recession, where then primarily around jobs, economy, finances, just things were looking better. Notice, though, the silent just took a dive because that was primarily based on, again, the results of the economy, on how their life savings just took a hit.
Yeah.
It's now some of what I always just found fascinating though is the 40, 37, they're close, but again, the 18 or 19, huge difference. It'll be really fascinating too when this gets updated with Gen Z.
Yeah.
So last and almost sometimes the most critical is how do you keep them? In general, millennials' average tenure is 18 months, 18 to 24 months if you're lucky, which means, sorry to say, they're leaving the day they start.
Wow.
So how can you retain them longer? Maybe for 3 years. Now, a great example I share is I was at a session and I asked millennials, how long have you been at your job? And this one gal raised her hand and she said 9 years. And the entire room just like gasped and looked over like, oh my gosh, what's the magic pill over there? And there's no magic pill. You'll see it here in a moment. It is possible. The point being is that when you recognize how to keep them, they will stay. They prefer to stay. If you don't show them reasons to stay, though, they're much more likely to jump than any older generation. Think of it. One financial reason us older generations may have stayed at a job was financial. Maybe the salary increases, certainly the pensions, but for one, pensions are gone. Secondly, if millennials have stayed with a company, even if you offer a 401, all of that is transferable. They lose nothing by moving it to just another company's 401. So there is no financial risk. Second, they've redefined loyalty. They've witnessed how not to do it from their Gen X and Boomer parents because they've witnessed how their parents have been treated by corporate America. Therefore, the days of mutual loyalty are not coming back. What you can do, though, is recognize what they prefer and keep them longer based on proactive, again, the communication we talked about earlier, the projects that you show them how they fit, etc. Here is also how you keep them. Well, some context again. Remember, boomers in general were changing the world, yet we're conforming in the workplace. As I shared, millennials truly have taken the workplace and turned it on its side. One way to retain them is flexibility. One way I help companies recognize this is clearly none of this implies feast or famine, all or nothing. Clearly you have to get your work done. Clearly you have projects that need to be completed. Clearly they need to be done under revenue or make the revenue under budgets, etc. Given all of that, you also have a possibility to say, okay, how flexible can this work be done? Does that mean maybe a half day at home? Maybe it's if you work these weekends, or who knows? I mean, again, every situation is different. But the simple questions, again, is ask, how flexible are you to do this work here? And what would be a good balance to complete it? And what level of flexibility do you prefer? Again, solicit input during all these projects, during the collaborations, during the feedback, and do it often. You may have read several companies have literally eliminated their performance evaluation process because they did the data and recognized they were spending millions of hours and dollars to basically solicit input and feedback on something that was all in the past. Instead, they're now doing it forward thinking, much more regular, much more often, and focusing on how to coach them in real time. That's all employees, but it'll work specifically and especially for millennials. I shared briefly about maybe there's an opportunity you can put them on some new entrepreneurial launch, something you've been trying to investigate for a while or address or assess. Let them give them it and run. As well, as long as you show them how that fits into your corporate or company's overall mission and vision and direction and etc. This is also a word you might want to write down. And someone mentioned this in the comments that Kathy has read. They are very adamant about causes. Yes, they'll join your company if you make a difference in the world. They will stay with your company if you support to or share their belief in whatever cause they're most motivated by. And it could be multiple. Go back to the example of the gal that had stayed 9 years at her company, a millennial. One of the reasons she stayed is because they support my cause, and she's very passionate about pets and uh, uh, shelters. And this is very telling. 9 out of 10 would switch.
And a question came in. As millennials will be working with other generations, do you have insights into how the millennials are aware of the view of other generations of them and the adjustments they need to make to effectively work within teams?
Great question. Part of it was briefly back to the unique strength slide where all of this awareness and knowledge is two-way, that millennials are equally responsible to become more aware of their own ability, their own fit, as well as how to work better with all generations and how to recognize the strengths of others to make it better. I would premise, or I would change the word conform to adapt. What are the better ways to help them adapt to the realities of the job?
Mm-hmm.
And I know we're pressed for time. This is just the last slide. This is just the whole change in, I showed earlier, the evolution of the employee. This is the change in leadership. And we touched on several of these things. So.
Awesome. Awesome. Tim, you just got a great comment in. Somebody said one of the best and most interesting presentations I've heard. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
The theme on the question, so I'm seeing people ask for tips on training millennials, and I'm seeing people ask for tips on managing them. So what?
Yeah, great. Yeah, good questions. Well, managing, as I briefly said, change it to coach. And coaching, therefore, implies lots of input, question and answer, coaching, assessing status, giving feedback, personal values, treat like family. And then because of their self-conscious persona, it may be, again, take time to just build trust to where then they're coming to you more proactively. I'd say initially then you need to be proactive going to them so that they're aware that this is a safe, trusted, collaborative environment. In terms of training, it's really fascinating, and I'm still, becoming a novice with this, is they go to YouTube. How they learn how to do something, they'll just type into YouTube and say, show me how to change the oil. Show me how to build this. Show me how to anything. I'm not, now that may not be the most viable resource, certainly when we're dealing with kind of more of the human resource levels, but if there's a way to incorporate video, vignettes, shorter the better, snippets. I did a series of training videos for a company here. It's a sales company. They're then going to post 7 or 10 different teaching sales videos, but all of them are meant to be, less than 90 seconds, chunks of information, how they fit into the greater scheme. It's just less tell, more show.
Awesome. I've had several people ask about the slides and that kind of thing. We are going to put the recording on YouTube. Everyone that registers will receive a link to the recording. So you will have access to come back and see it again. So we had people say, I love this presentation. So many tips for working with millennials, comfortable to listen to, interesting and useful information I can use. Um, Somebody else typed in one of the best webinars I've attended, very relevant to what's going on in the workplace. With this information, I can be more effective in working with my Gen Y employees. So that was awesome. Somebody made a comment on training millennials where they said they like just in time learning. So that was good. So a lot of people saying thanks and heading out because we have used up our time. And Tim, there's still a lot of people hanging here as well. So obviously they loved it. Um, Somebody else said, as a millennial, I've always feared the stereotypes. I feel better about it now. Thank you. And you've got, oh, here you go, Tim. Tim is the best. So that's awesome. Thank
Well,
you. And
whoever said that, please stay in touch on either LinkedIn or Twitter.
there you go. There you go. Awesome.
Yeah, please reach out. We can continue this conversation online or however. The fascinating part is what makes me so passionate about it is this whole generational thing continues, and look out for Gen Z.
Yeah. Awesome. It was fascinating how, and it's so true, like your quote, oh, okay, that was back from 1923. And we've had the same conversation so many times with each generation. So
Yep.
excellent. Excellent stuff. Tim, thank you so much. Such a delight to have you here. Obviously, a ton of people and very well received. So fabulous, fabulous. We'll get the link out to everybody on the recording. And do look for Tim on LinkedIn and on Twitter. You can see him right there. So stay connected. All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.